At least not yet. So we're just going to say first, she troll. Second, she troll. And third. Just like that. Okay? The princess couldn't help herself. She jumped out and exclaimed, "There's a better way." "What's to keep us from baking you in a pie?" said one. "The men would like that," the others cackled. "Then you'd never hear my advice," the princess answered calmly. "You're weary of using magic to make yourselves beautiful, are you not? So why not solve the problem once and for all?" The troll wives stared at her. "Next time your husbands complain, ask them if good cooking is important to them," said the princess. "They'll say yes," said the first. Then the princess continued, "Ask if you troll wives are good cooks." "They'll say no," said the second. "So then you'll say, but you men are better at doing things, aren't you? Don't you see?" the princess asked. "If cooking is important to them and they're sure that they're better at everything than you are, then it only makes sense that they do the cooking from now on." Smiles slowly began to spread across the troll wives' craggy faces, and they began to dance. "The men are acting rude," they sang, "so now they'll cook the food." "You've done us a great favor, human," they said. "We'll repay you someday." The princess bowed and continued her journey. When the princess arrived at the palace, the queen was shocked by her appearance. "You came here in dusty common clothes, all alone and on foot?" she gasped from her throne. The princess soon realized that convincing the queen that she was worthy of her son's affection would be a very difficult task. The queen kept her busy day and night, learning the ways of a princess. And since the queen spent most of her time doing delicate needlework and embroidery, she insisted the young woman do the same. The princess grew restless and unhappy. How she longed to ride a horse, climb a tree, read a book. Only the time she spent with the prince, who treated her as an equal and a friend, made it bearable. "To prove yourself worthy of my son," the queen announced to the princess one day, "you must spin a pound of flax into the finest thread before the sun rises, or leave the kingdom forever." She arranged for the princess to be locked in a room containing only a spinning wheel and a mound of flaxseed. The princess had barely learned to spin, but a whole pound in one night? Impossible. But she put her head in her hands in despair. Suddenly, a strange old woman with an enormous nose appeared before her. Though the woman seemed familiar to the princess, she couldn't quite place her. "I'll take care of that," the woman said, motioning to the wheel. "And all I ask in return is that you call me Auntie the next time we meet." The princess agreed. When the queen unlocked the door at dawn, the princess was curled on the floor asleep beside a ball of flax spun into the finest thread. That night, the queen locked the princess in the room again, insisting that she turn all the thread into linen by morning, a task even more impossible than the first. And again, the princess despaired, but a second old woman appeared and said, "If you call me Auntie the next time we meet, I'll make your linen." One final test, the queen shrieked when she discovered the linen. "Sew this linen into 12 fine shirts." The third old woman appeared in the room that night, this one with bulging eyes, and she quickly made the shirts. The queen was not happy, but she could no longer object. The prince, and the princess were happily wed, and they celebrated their marriage with a lavish feast. To the prince's surprise, the strange old women who had helped her were at the wedding feast. As they boldly walked up to greet the princess at the royal table, the princess remembered her promise to them. "Welcome, aunties," she said. The prince graciously stood and greeted the women, believing them to be his wife's family. He offered them a chair at the royal table near his mother, who could barely conceal her disgust. Then the prince turned to the three old women and stammered, "Forgive me, but are you certain you're my wife's aunts?" "Oh, yes," said the first woman. "She's been so kind to us," said the second old woman. You may be wondering how such a beautiful princess could be related to women who look so very different," said the third. The prince nodded. "Well, see this horrible sausage nose?" asked the first woman. "My mother taught me that a lady must spin and spin thread, and though I was beautiful once, all that spinning made my nose grow." "I was once lovely too," said the second, nudging the queen with her elbow, "and life as a dancer. But all I ever did was weave, so now I'm bent over like an old tree. And I spent my whole childhood staring at my sewing, so now I'm pop-eyed as a frog," declared the third, looking right at the queen with her bulging eyes. The prince's mouth fell open. He turned quickly to his new wife and says, "We can't let this happen to you. Promise you won't spend all your time spinning, weaving, and sewing with my mother. Instead, you'll write and read and dance with me." "And rule with you," shouted the first old woman. The princess smiled and nodded in agreement, her heart flooding with joy. And as the three women curtsied and turned to leave, the princess suddenly realized why they seemed so familiar. Peeking out at the bottom of each skirt, there bobbed a dark tufted tail. And that's the end of the story. Now, let's go back to our sociogram. Now, when we start looking at characters and we start describing and examining how they are related to each other, oftentimes this will reveal more and more about the conflict and theme. So we're just going to talk about these two right here. The first she-troll. Okay. What did she do? Well, she made the thread, didn't she? And what did the second she-troll do? Well, she made the linen. And the third one made the shirts. How did they relate? See, this is the thing. You want to talk about how they, what they did and how they relate. So they were helpful. They were helpful. You could find other words. You might have described them more distinctly from each other, but they all were pretty much fulfilled the same function throughout the story. In other stories, you're going to find that each character has a very, very specific role to play. But these three worked in conjunction to help the princess secure her position before the queen. If I was to do another circle up here, and I would say, what did she do? She tested the princess, and she was opposed to the princess. Just by doing that, we can see that these three help her to overcome her. And that's really the story of the three aunties. You can use sociograms all the time. I use them occasionally when I'm working through a novel that has multiple characters. The last time I used it, I was trying to read a story called, what was it? Oh yeah, War and Peace. It was an abridged version of War and Peace, and I couldn't keep track of the characters. And so I did something very similar to this, and it helped me tremendously to understand what was going on. If you're reading novels or you're reading stories where names are not a part of your own culture, this is a very helpful thing. And I would encourage you to use it. We will be using it more and more as the year goes by. Now, we have something we need to do. We have a vocabulary quiz. It's short. It's not really that long. There's only 8 questions to it. I believe there's, well, I'm not going to say that because that'll give you a clue. But you need to finish that. It's posted on your Google Classroom. You can go do that. Make sure that you submit it. It should only take you 10 minutes or so to do. You should get it done now, not tomorrow. And so I want you to go to it right now, pull it up, and take that quiz. This is over vocabulary 7, I think, or is it 8? I don't remember. Our current vocabulary words.
Just like we always tell you, if you don't see it, refresh. Refresh. You were supposed to study the words on your own, not from the Quizlet. That's why there wasn't one.
Guys, the quiz isn't that hard. It should be fairly easy for you. We didn't try to trip you up. We didn't try to trick you. It's pretty straightforward.
These are the same words we've been working on for the last 2 weeks, guys. You should have known the definition because you should have done your work. Had you done your work, you would have a definition. Guys, everyone's blowing me up about they don't know the definitions. Then you didn't do your work. Yes, Carly. Yes, Carly. What do they do when they're done, Mr. Mullen?
Well, I would look and see if I get in any extra minutes that I have, so I wouldn't on iReady, so I don't have to do them later. That might be one thing. What do you think, Mrs. Gigby?
Sounds good to me.
Okay.
Not sure yet, Jazzy. It's good. The direction said to look for them, Jonathan. Some words have multiple meanings. Or it's worded in a different way. Yes, they were, Colin. 7:51. Go ahead and come back. Mr. Hartman is getting ready.
Yes, thank you. Those of you who are here, thank you for being here. Appreciate your time and your attention. Go ahead and go into Google Classroom, and there is a reading in your Google Classroom under the classwork tab, because apparently the classwork tab is just as much as a mystery as it was weeks ago for some of us. Nevertheless, go to the classwork tab and you will notice something that says Propaganda Shifty Science. It is a PDF file, 4 pages. Again, lots of pictures, graphics, etc. So not a tremendous amount of text, but go ahead and read that, and I will give us about, I'll give us 10 minutes. So we'll come back at 11:02. Then we're going to have a short discussion about the contents of that particular reading, and then we will take a quiz. So I'll give you about 10 minutes to read that, and it is in your Google Classroom. Are we, sorry, catching up on questions here. Are we going to homeroom today? Maybe for the last few minutes, I don't know. But for the time being, we're here right now. Isabella, did you ever find the vocab quiz? I'm sure you did, but let me know if you didn't.
Mr. Hartman, did you put a due date on that propaganda poster?
Yeah, it's due Thursday.
Thursday. Okay, thank you. I was going to put it on the to-do list. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, yeah, that's good. Yeah, it's due Thursday. Ms. Bragg, are you there?
Yes, I am.
The two iReady assignments, which ones were those? I have a student who can't find them. I don't know. I'm pretty sure I did, but which ones were they?
Those were the ones that divide with decimals and multiply with decimals. They should be at the top of iReady. Like when you put in the 6th grade standards, they should be very
Okay,
close to the top of the list.
so divide with decimals and multiply with decimals?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Shifty science and propaganda. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you, and let's talk a little bit about what we're doing here. So, slanted science. So we want to talk a little bit about sort of what happens. Now we're talking about this in the context of writing. So I want to back out for just a moment and talk about why we're reading, because inevitably people ask themselves, well, wait a minute, this is writing. Why are we talking? Or why are we reading, or why are we talking about all this? Because again, we're talking about nonfiction writing. And a lot of times when something like this happens, or someone has an agenda of some kind, they are taking certain liberties with the facts. And so what do I mean by that? Well, let me read this first paragraph and then we'll go from there. Individuals aren't the only targets of propaganda. Science can come under fire as well. How is that possible? Well, sometimes science reveals information that conflicts with people's beliefs. For example, a lot of information on social media claims that the measles vaccine causes autism. Science has proven this to be wrong, but the false messages make some parents afraid to vaccinate their children, leading to outbreaks of the dangerous disease. So this is one that I want to focus on today. Science also reveals facts that threaten money-making businesses, such as that tobacco use is unhealthy and that fossil fuels, including coal, oil, and natural gas, cause climate change. For years, the tobacco and fossil fuel industries have fought back against these scientific findings, launching campaigns of false and confusing information to try to turn the truth upside down. So this is true. And when we talk about this in the context of the tobacco industry, for example, so when we'll get to global warming here, climate change, whatever you want to call it. So for years and years, so as far back, if you look here in the second paragraph, you'll notice as far back as the 1940s, a number of scientific studies found that smoking causes lung cancer and other health problems. And in 1964, the US government put out a report with the same findings. Over the following 30 years, the tobacco industry fought all efforts to limit the use of tobacco products. And one of their most effective strategies was to question these studies. So what happened was there were, like I said, there was a body of research and scientific studies that had been done for a long period of time. And the tobacco industry just came outright and said, nope, that's not true. And so what they would do is, if you look here in the third paragraph, here's what they did. So how are they able to cause so much confusion for such a long time? Like now we all know and just accept that we know that smoking is bad for our health. But for years, the tobacco industry fought that claim. So what did they do? The tobacco industry formed its own group called the Tobacco Industry Research Committee, later called the Council for Tobacco Research, which produced research challenging the idea that smoking kills people. Despite thousands of studies, thousands, not 2 or 3, thousands, showing that smoking is harmful to people's health, the tobacco industry studies managed to confuse the debate. So eventually, a combination of public education about the dangers of smoking and lawsuits against the tobacco industry changed everything. Today, it's illegal to smoke in restaurants and offices in the United States, and there are far fewer smokers now than 30 years ago. And most important, the majority of Americans now know that smoking is bad for them and support laws that reduce tobacco use. So again, we know that confusion is a part of propaganda. So what the tobacco industry would do, the Council for Tobacco Research, is they would hire trained scientists, doctors, to conduct these studies that would basically come to a conclusion that, oh, well, smoking isn't harmful for you. So they would generate these what were essentially bogus studies, but with credible names attached to them. And of course, those people were being paid for that. And then so people who were trying to do the research would look at one study, then they would look at another and go, I don't know who to believe. And that's exactly what the people who are trying to create the confusion, that's exactly what they're trying to get you to do. So climate change. This is another one. There are certain things that we know for a fact, and this tends to be a very no pun intended, hot topic for a lot of people. It's definitely a triggering statement when you talk about climate change. Climate change is real. If you want to look at the science behind it, the temperatures, like global temperatures across the board, are increasing, which means that the planet is warming. And the science points to greenhouse gas emissions from burning fossil fuels, so which is the cars that we're driving, the factories that are powered by fossil fuels, and it's our biggest source of energy right now. So we're in the midst of a huge change right now, where you're seeing, I believe it's by 2030, and I have some friends who work in the auto industry, in various levels of the auto industry. Auto manufacturers are not going to be making cars that are powered on fossil fuels. They're phasing those out. So in your lifetime, you're going to see electric cars or some type of that. That's the one that's making the most sense at this point. But that's what you're going to see. That's where auto manufacturers are headed. And in fact, the whole transportation system, the way that we move from one place to another, is changing. I have a former student of mine, years and years ago. He graduated. He got his master's degree in design and actually did his thesis on the future of transportation. It's really interesting. But yeah, cars are not going to be powered the same. They're not going to look the same. And you will see all those changes in our lifetime. But the switch that's occurring is something that's more eco-friendly, or it's more friendly to the environment. So you're seeing things such as wind and solar power, and that means less business for companies that produce fossil fuels. So oil companies have been a little smarter and a little more sophisticated than tobacco. They sort of saw what happened to the tobacco industry. And now you've got many of them that understand or have accepted that climate change is real, and they've proposed some measures to curb it. So not all of them, but there's a general understanding that, yeah, like things are changing, the world's getting warmer, and we need to figure that out. But they sort of followed the same playbook as the tobacco companies. So they funded misleading studies that showed that climate change isn't real, or wasn't caused by people. And so these false findings are repeated over and over and over. And eventually the truth comes out and changes end up being made. But the whole global warming, the climate change, that still happening right now. But one final point, and then we'll take the quiz, which shouldn't take any more than 10 minutes. And this is the key to the whole lesson here today. So how do we spot shifty science? It's difficult. I was a journalist before I started teaching. And you are always on guard for this. There's somebody always has an agenda. Somebody is always looking for free press. So, which means that people are routinely trying to use your position or use your access to media to advance their agenda. So as a reporter, as a journalist, you have to be very aware of who you're interviewing, like what, why they're doing what they're doing. So how do we, and I'll read this in its entirety here because it's the point that I want you to understand before we leave today. Most scientists conduct responsible research, which means that when they identify a problem of some kind and they go through the scientific method, they're doing it responsibly and they're doing it honestly. They try to answer important questions about health, technology, space, the environment, and many other topics. But some bad studies slip through the cracks and get more attention from the media than they deserve. So here's the key item. So how can you spot the false information? It can be difficult. And even journalists can struggle to tell the difference. That's 100% true, by the way. The most important question to ask is this: who is funding the study? As an organization or company behind it that may want to sway public opinion in its own favor. So for instance, if a candy company is behind a study that claims eating candy will make you healthier, think twice before believing that research. And in general, if the results of a study sound too good to be true, they probably are. So there is a Wu-Tang song, Clan. Forgive me, I'm on a tangent here, but it's titled Cream, C-R-E-A-M, cash rules everything around me. And that is very much the case when it comes to these types of situations. So if there is a study that comes out or you read about that, it's important to find out who's funding it. Because if the Council of Tobacco Research or whatever is funding a study that says, hey, check this out, it's totally okay to smoke. Well, that's what you would expect because the people who are funding that study have a vested financial interest in getting you to buy that product or whatever the question may be. So, and I have this debate with my own son who he likes to wrench on cars, like that's his own thing. And we have debates about climate change all the time. He doesn't like electric car, which doesn't make any sense to me. But it's like one thing that we do know, whether or not you like it or not, is that the things that we pump into the air with fossil fuels are not good. They're just not good. They're not good for us. They're not good for the environment. And, we can certainly debate the degree to which that is happening, but whether or not that is the truth it's indisputable. So fortunately, we're moving that needle in the right direction as far as clean and renewable energy and that type of thing. We still have a long way to go, but we're certainly much further along than we were 10 years ago. That's for sure. So how to spot shifty science. You're going to hear about studies, all these things, but the big question is who's funding it? And a lot of these major companies are really astute at hiding that. So a lot of times, like obviously if we were doing a study on tobacco use and whether or not it's good for us, the tobacco company wouldn't call it the Council for Tobacco Research or whatever. They would give it some benign name like Citizens for Good Health, but then you would have to go and track down, okay, who is this organization? Who runs it? How is it funded? And anyway, so where's the money coming from? That will answer that question. Okay, I will post. So that is it for today. I'm going to go ahead and post the quiz. Yeah, they need to make a car that doesn't use fossil fuel. Yeah, I recently purchased an electric vehicle, and it's pretty cool. Actually, it's kind of a drag. I wish the range was longer on it, but the range on those cars is getting a lot better. But the fact that I can just drive by gas stations now and just wave at them, and I don't have to worry about oil changes and that kind of thing. It's yeah, it's pretty good. I believe it or not, I actually feel better when I drive around. No, I wish it was a Tesla. If it was a Tesla, I'd be at it driving right now. But my sister is in the process of buying a Tesla right now. But man, those are nice cars. Nice cars. I ended up with a Nissan Leaf, but still pretty cool. All right, guys. Yeah, Tesla's are on the move. I know a lot of people who are buying Tesla stock. It's crazy. Okay, so be on the lookout for all right. Okay, the quiz, it is called Breaking the News #4. Should be posted in your Google Classroom. You can go ahead and take that. It's open book or whatever. So if you have the file open, that's cool. No problem there. But go ahead and take that quiz. I believe it's I think 5 or 6 questions. 2 of them, 2 or 3 are true and false. So it's not. If you did the reading, it should be a no-brainer. But go ahead. I'll give you about 6 minutes to finish that.
So when they're finished with this quiz, can they log off?
Yeah, I think, yeah, once they're, because we're pretty much, unless you all have something else for them to do, but once they're finished with the quiz, they are free to go for the day as far as I'm concerned.
That sounds good to me. And
Okay.
no, there is no math tutoring today for those of you who are asking. Since we had a guest, I'm not going to extend math for today. You guys have been very attentive today. Appreciate it.